That's all.
Remember, like,
yeah, what's
Don't mention the 10-point program, because the Brown Brace, right, so the Black Panthers had a 10-point political program, and there's no mention that historically, the Brown Brace had a 10-point political program. Do you still use that program today? Do you have a different
Hey,
political
okay.
program?
well, every city, every state has their own issues, and we are working with the original ones and trying to update it and everything to this day. So yeah, we're basically seeing principles, but yes, of course, modernize it and update it to certain areas. Every different chapter has their own issues and what they do go on. But of course, there's going to be a basic guidelines.
Because the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party is still, right, it's still valid today,
Right.
every single thing in terms of as a liberation program, right? It's not like those things have been solved at all. So I was just wondering how you felt about these kind of radical political programs that were anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, right? So had like pretty big vision of how to change, not just how to be included in the American dream, but how to take apart this thing we call America. This is not
Right. Take a lot of paperwork, petitions, things like that. Now this is more not as easy. It's more. It's easier way in certain points and harder in other ways. But of course, with the help of others, things will get done.
okay? So if you don't notice, we're small, but we're definitely strong. We've been doing protests all around Chicago, and I've only been with them since September, basically. I came and did a parade. Just so you guys know, we are always recruiting. So if you know or are interested in becoming a Brown Beret, you do have to be Indigenous. That's probably our only prerequisite, and then you have to come to 2 events. Once you do that, you have to bring in 2 members yourself. I'm definitely looking for more women that are looking to be part of this movement of social injustice towards immigrants. So if you know anyone that's interested, please let me know. I can give you my Facebook, phone number, email, whatever you want. I have it all. Twitter, and anything. I'm available on all. I'm probably the most socially, as far as like online, socially available. I'll just put it like that. So if you have Twitter, you don't have Twitter, I have Snapchat, all that. I'm all in it. So if you would like to friend me, I'll give you my information also. I like to talk a lot, so afterwards, feel free. Ask me whatever you want. I'll give you my information, and that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. They're ready then?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, they're ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gerald. Let's see. Can I take this off of this? Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Let's see if I can successfully do this. Multitask with 2 hands. I don't want to stand in front of the projector. Thank you so much. Okay. So my name is Gerald Polanco, and I am an attorney with First Defense Legal Aid. So First Defense Legal Aid has historically been doing station house representation, where we would go to police stations if someone got arrested. So let's say on this street corner someone got arrested, you knew the person, you could call our hotline, 1-800-LAW-REP-4, and an attorney would be there roughly within an hour of that phone call to the police station where the person got arrested. So if you were to call our number, you would give them the name, date of birth, and ideally the place where they got picked up. Usually we like to have 2 of the 3 things because it helps us sort of locate them. There has been a couple changes to that and how that works, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But the other thing that we do, which we're still doing and trying to develop and grow stronger in, is community education. So essentially this, right? We're coming to community spaces like the Brown Berets and engaging with the community and teaching them about their rights. So what can you do when interacting with the police? Apparently, the side hates me. So I will, on occasion, make really bad jokes. Please laugh at them. No, don't. Don't encourage bad jokes. But if they're good, laugh at them. Anyway, so that's essentially what we do, and we have a lot of different things and projects along the way. But I'm here to sort of educate you about your rights. I like these to be a little bit more interactive. So if you have questions along the way, please ask them, right? Please raise your hand, ask the questions. I'm more than happy to stop and address them on the moment. If at any point in time I say, oh, we're gonna address it later, and if I don't, ask me again, okay? All right, so part of this and part of what makes this ideally interactive, right, is that we know that in a lot of community spaces, we have interaction with the police, right? Either personally or with someone we know, right? Friends, family, loved ones. And so all that we ask is that when you share stories about anything that's happened with you or with someone else that you know, that you keep it third person and hypothetical. So our little example here, right, is Superman or Beyonce. But you can do anything, right? You can do Superman, Beyonce, Black Panther, Jay-Z. You can say John Doe, Jane Doe, Professor Xavier, Storm, I don't care. But it's just a way for us to keep confidentiality for the person where they had that interaction with the police, as well as create a safe space for people who might want to share about themselves or someone they know here. And we also don't know whether there might be a case still being investigated. So we want to make sure that we protect the confidentiality of the person, okay? So it can be hard sometimes, but I'll try to keep you guys in check if you do that. But ideally, I want you guys to share. So if at any point in time I'm talking about something, you say, hey, hold up, you said this, but this is what happened to the Flash, right? And then the Flash was, walking down the street, this is what was happening, and that's not what you just said. So why is that? Feel free to say that, right? And then that way I can address those questions as they happen. So this is our number, right? 1-800-LAW-REP-4. We have cards at the end which we're going to pass out. The number is still valid. The only difference is that as of March 1st, the Public Defender's Office, the Cook County Public Defender's Office is the one going to the police stations, right? So a lot of people have some hesitations about this, and we can talk a little bit about what the station visits look like. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the end. But truthfully, they have a 24-hour unit. We've been in constant communication with them throughout the process, and we are fairly confident that they're going to be just fine, if not great, in this endeavor, right? Truthfully, half of my job when I would go to police stations was completed the moment I announced myself to the police officer, right? Because what you do when you're there for station house representation is truthfully introducing outside eyes and ears, right? So what's one of the best ways to limit police brutality, right, is to actually have someone from the outside world come in and say, I know that there's another human back there, right? And I'm here for them, and I speak on behalf of them. And so, so truthfully, once I'm on the record, I'm on the record. And that goes a long way to helping curb a lot of that stuff. When I go back there, when I'm talking to the client, I'm just talking to them about what their rights are to not speak, to always have an attorney present, and to make that known. And that goes a long, long way. There's no actual court representation at the moment of the police station, okay? But we can go a little bit into details later. This stat is from the year before last, right? So 1.5% had an attorney in Chicago police custody, right? So of the thousands of people every year they get arrested in Chicago, only 1.5% of people had police custody in 2017. As of 2018, it was 1.7, okay? So that is a very, 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 very low amount. We want to increase that number. We want to increase the demand for phone calls because we know that there are people back there who are not getting represented, who are at police stations getting arrested, and their rights are being violated, right? So they did like a 60-minute special a couple years back where they said that Chicago is the false confession capital of the country. And we know statistically that Illinois has one of the highest rates of wrongful convictions, the bulk of them which come out of Cook County. And I think it was somewhere around like 20 to 40% of those wrongful convictions are actually false confessions, right? So I want us to think about that. How do you think false confessions happen? Just shout out a guess.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, pressure from the police officer, I presume, right? What else?
Torture.
Torture, yes.
Giving a smaller sentence, opening a smaller sentence.
Sure, possibly the offering smaller sentences, the possibility of a future plea negotiation down the line, right? You're scared. They say, hey, you know, if you talk to us about this, we can possibly reduce your sentence, right? What else? It can trick you, right? So a little known fact is that the police can legally lie to you, right? You are not allowed to lie to them. That is against the law, okay? So the police do that a lot. And one way in which false confessions happen is exactly what you guys said, right? So it's feeling tricked into saying something, right? Sometimes you might get arrested, and maybe you, let's presume you're not innocent of anything. Let's say you did X, but the police want to grab you for X, Y, and Z, right? So oftentimes, even if you committed a crime, they want to charge you with a greater amount of that crime or a different version of that crime, right? Sometimes you did nothing, right? And what we want to do is try to limit the police involvement in charges, in the ability for false confessions, right? Because false confessions happen because people are scared, right? And false confessions are fundamentally, what is a confession?
Admission of guilt.
An admission of guilt, right? And what is an admission of guilt? Fundamentally, right? It's a story. You're telling a story that says, it's a narrative that says, this happened and I did it, right? And sometimes those stories is not as insidious as we think, right? Sometimes it is torture, like you said, right? Sometimes it is being, a negotiation, right, for a lighter charge. But sometimes a confession comes about because you said, I came from here, I didn't do that, I did this. But you just spoke, right? And all someone has to do is weave together those pieces of information you gave, which you feel, right, are not indicative of you committing a crime. And now there's a narrative, there's a story. And the moment you sign that, you sign a confession, right? So I want us to all really, really think about that, right? Silence, one of our slogans that go out is like, silence is power, right? When you're silent, the police cannot put words in your mouth, right? And that's why representation at police stations is really important, and that's why education, community education on what to do when interacting with the police is really, really important. Because oftentimes we put ourselves into more trouble than we are actually in, right? And it happens naturally, right? If I were to say to you, what's your name? Paulo, right? Okay, so if I were to say, Paulo, you stole my backpack, right? What is your inclination? What do you want to say?
What do you answer?
What would you normally answer? Let's say I'm not a police officer, I'm just a random person. I say, Paulo stole my backpack. Hey guys, everyone, he stole my backpack. I brought a backpack, he stole it.
I didn't.
I didn't do it, right? Your first instinct is to defend yourself, right, Paulo, right? Your first instinct is to defend yourself, and that is a human natural instinct. But that is the instinct that will get you in trouble, right? It can happen, it can help, right, in social situations, but when the police are not looking to figure out what the truth is, necessarily, right? What the police are trying to figure out is, can I match this crime to this person? They're not looking at you with good intentions, right? They're looking at you to see, are you the person that I'm looking for, right? So your job, I would tell people, your job is not to help the police, it's the police's job to help themselves, right? And oftentimes when we talk to the police, what we're doing is we're helping them with their job, If I go to McDonald's and I order fries, right? I don't go behind the counter and start putting my fries in oil, right? I let them do their job. Let the police do their job. My job is not to help them, okay? See, they caught on. They laughed at my joke. Y'all get on board.
I was laughing.
I want to
So we have a set of words that we like people to say, right? These are words that we've sort of pulled from Supreme Court cases where the Supreme Court has said, these are what people's rights are in relation to the police, and this is what the police have to do or not have to do, right? And so we call them the magic words. I tend to call them magic phrases because they're not individual words, they're usually phrases, okay? But they're going to be in purple, so a little outline just for you guys.
Thank you.
So what do you do? How do you know you're under arrest?
Because
You got handcuffs. What else?
On the floor.
You're faced on the floor. Yes. In a car. Handcuffs. Right. You might ask, "Am I under arrest?" Okay. That is all right, but not 100%. Right. So what you want to ask is usually, "Am I free to go?" Right. Arrest is very specific term. And remember that the police can lie to you, right? So what you're trying to do, right, is to determine whether you're free to leave. The Supreme Court has said that custody is a reasonable expectation, right, that you are able to leave, right, any situation. So the goal is to determine, am I free to leave? So if I'm a police officer and I approach you, what's your name?
German.
¿Cómo? German. Herman. Okay. So I'm a police officer, I approach you, right? And I start talking to you and say, hey, do you know, Herman, do you know Pookie? Do you know so-and-so on the street corner, right? Right? I'm talking to you. I haven't put handcuffs on you, right? You're not in the back of a police car. So what would your response to me be?
No.
No? You guys are going to say, no, you don't know Pookie. Okay. What else might you want to say?
free to go.
Yeah, this one, right? So am I free to go? Right? So you might say, am I free to go? Right? Hermano's going to say, am I free to go? And the police officer is going to have one of what? What are his possible responses?
In a minute.
In a minute, not yet, right? Something like that, right? But I just want to talk to you, right? He might not want to answer the question.
You're not in any trouble.
You're not in any
Oh,
trouble.
that's a good one.
Oh,
That's a good one. That's a winner.
Of course, the parentheses is yet. So yeah, that is correct, right? So oftentimes they're going to avoid the question, right? So possible answers might be yes, right? You're free to leave. The other possible answer might be no, you're not free to leave. And what the common response right here is evading the question, right? Because the job of the police officer when they stop to talk to you, unless they're going to be like, hey, how do you get here? Like, unless they're asking for directions, truthfully, if they took time to stop and talk to you, it's because they want to get information out of you, right? There's a goal, there's a purpose, there's an intent, right? So if they stop to talk to you, they want something from you, right? So they're not going to want to scare you off by saying, no, you're not free to leave. They're just going to ask, they just want to ask some questions, right? So if they say yes, right, you calmly walk away. We don't advocate for people to run. It's very common for people to want to run, but we say no, right? And why would that be? You might get shot.
Oh, let's go.
You might look guilty, right? If I took time out of my day, right, to stop and talk to you, and I say, fine, you can go, and then all of a sudden you just bolt,
I gotta go back.
then I might want to chase you, right? I might think, oh, this guy actually might have information, might be guilty of something, right? I'm now super suspicious of that person. So we don't want to increase the likelihood that you're going to get chased down, or even worse, to die. Right, to get shot. My goal with these workshops fundamentally is to do two things, right? Is to give you tools when you're interacting with the police so that you can put yourself in the best situation for later in court if you reach court, right? And to survive your encounter with the police officer in the moment. That's my two goals, right? So in some ways you have to sort of read the room and see who you're working with, right? Not all police officers are the same, right, in terms of personality, and you have to then realize how you're going to place things. I'm also going to talk to you about words in a particular order, because it just sort of works narratively that way. But I want you to also think of these words as tools in a tool belt, right? You got a tool belt, you got a toolbox, whichever one you prefer. And these words are sort of your tool. They're your hammer, they're your nails, right? They're your screwdriver. And you're going to pull them out when you need it. I'm going to give them to you in an order, but that might not be the order that you're going to use it, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might be. So if they say no, or if they don't answer, right, that's when you know you have to invoke your 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. I want to be clear about these things. The Bill of Rights applies to any person. It does not have anything to do with your status as an immigrant, right? So whether you are a legal permanent resident, a U.S. citizen, undocumented, you have rights in this country just like any other person, right? And so it has nothing to do with status. I think sometimes they can get confused. And I just want to make that really, really clear that that's not the case, okay? So if, like you guys said, right, you're not in trouble, or, I don't want to say no, assume that you're in custody. Assume that you're not allowed to leave. Because if you work from that assumption, you're going to protect yourself the best, right? And it might be that 5 minutes later, the cop is like, whatever, and walks away. But you want to make sure that you put yourself in the best situation, right? That's why you always want to ask, am I free to go? Okay, so you're not free to leave, right? And I'm still asking you questions. I'm the police officer, right? So what is going to be your response to any questions I'm asking? No answer, silence. What are some other possible responses? No hablo inglés. Ay, después cuando es latino, and he's like, okay, yo puedo hablar en español, ¿verdad? Te jodiste, ¿no? Right? All right, what else?
Want to talk to a lawyer?
I want to talk to a lawyer. That's a possible one. Anyone else? So you guys both hit on the 2 key things, right? It is, I will not talk, I want my lawyer, right? So we want people to stick to those words as closely as they possibly can, right? Because if you move around those words in any way, or you say them differently, the police officer can then argue, right, that you did not invoke your rights properly. And they couldn't reasonably expect to know that that's what you wanted. So we want you all to say these words almost exactly verbatim like this. I will not talk, I want my lawyer. Right?
I will not talk, I want my lawyer.
Perfect. Everyone, recite that back to me.
I will not talk. I want my lawyer.
Oh, beautiful. All right. I will not talk, I want my lawyer. That's exactly what I want everyone to say. We're going to recite all these magic words at the end, so thank you for reminding me. So I will not talk, I want my lawyer. You're going to always want to say that. Why do you say those 2 words? Those 2 sentences?
I know you won't talk. And you know you protect it.
Perfect. So what do you guys think that this calls for, right? If I say I will not talk, what is this about? Your right to remain silent, right? It's your 5th Amendment right against self-incrimination, right? So you have the right under the Constitution in the 5th Amendment that you have a right to not incriminate yourself, which means you have a right to remain silent, okay? So if you say I will not talk, or I choose to remain silent, right? That is your invocation of your 5th Amendment right. Right? Sometimes in movies you'll say people like, I plead the 5th. Normally that's usually in court, but it's essentially the same right, right? And then this one has to do with your 6th Amendment right to counsel. Everyone has a right to legal representation, and in the criminal context, everyone has, no matter your citizenship status, everyone has a right to an attorney, right? Everyone has a right to get one. And everyone has a right to have one, whether if you cannot afford it, right? So what are the Miranda rights, right? You guys have seen police procedurals, I'm sure, and attorney stuff. What is normally the Miranda rights that you guys all know from TV? Can anyone recite it back to me?
You have the right to
Remain silent.
anything you say.
Okay, not all at once. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? You have a right to an attorney if you cannot afford one, one will provide it for you. When is it that a police officer is supposed to say this to you? as you get arrested? What's the other possible answers?
They don't have to say it.
They don't have to say it. What's the other one? Anyone? So the truth is that your Miranda rights only technically kick in what's called custodial interrogation. Does anyone know what that is?
When you're already in custody?
When you're in custody, and what else?
You're already in a room.
You're already in a room. So it has to do a little less with actual physical location. So if we think back to this, right, where I said, am I free to go? And I said, custody, right, is your ability to feel free to leave. And interrogation is when you're being asked questions with the purposes of incriminating you, right? With the purpose of getting information that could incriminate you or make you liable for a particular crime, right? So when I say I will not talk, I want my lawyer, right? What I'm trying to do is to invoke my Miranda rights, right? You have the right to remain silent, right? I will not talk. And you have the right to an attorney, right? I want my lawyer. So you want to invoke those because the moment that Miranda often gets said is not always when you get arrested. In police, in movies and stuff, it's really misleading because they'll arrest someone and then they'll go to the police chief and the police chief is like, did you Mirandize them? And then they're like, no, we gotta let them go because you didn't Mirandize them. False.
Yeah, right.
That is false. And a lot of people think, oh, I got arrested and no one Mirandized me. No one read my rights when they arrested me. So that must mean they should let me go, or, that's BS, right? They shouldn't be doing that. The truth is that you don't have to Mirandize someone unless you're being interrogated after you're not free to leave. So when I go back to this, am I free to go? I'm on a street corner, right? Herman is on a street corner. And I'm talking to him, and you say what? You say, am I free to go? And I say, oh, you're not in trouble, right? And then I keep asking you about Pookie. I'm very interested in Pookie. I want to know where she's at. And so I keep talking to you, right? I keep asking you questions. You don't have handcuffs on you. But let's say you tell me, I don't know where Pookie is. Pookie, oftentimes I hardly ever see her. She sometimes is on, down a couple blocks, XYZ. Pookie's just a family friend. I hardly know her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That was custodial interrogation. You are not free to leave, and I'm asking you questions with the intention of connecting you to someone that I think is connected to a crime, right? You have no handcuffs, you're not inside a police car, and you're not at a police station. This is why these words are really important, because oftentimes the police know the legal distinctions, sometimes. Sometimes they don't. But the police are trained to take advantage of the legal distinctions even when they don't know the legal distinctions. Does that make sense? They get advanced training you do not get, right? So they're trained to get information from you, right? To manipulate you emotionally, psychologically, to get information from you, right? And one of those tactics is to lie to you, right? As we discussed. So that's why when I say, I will not talk, I want my lawyer, that should be the answer to every single question that comes out of your mouth after, am I free to leave, and you're not free to leave. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay.
Oh, back there.
Oh, yep.
Sorry. Is there any information that we are required in Illinois to give the patient, like name, address, date of birth?
That is a wonderful... Sure, that is a wonderful question, right? And I will address that in 5 seconds. So I do want to emphasize this. When you say I will not talk, I want my lawyer, you then have to remain silent. So it's not enough to actually be quiet, right? You have to say I will not talk, I want my lawyer. You have to verbally invoke your rights, right? You have to verbally ask for those rights, but then you then have to remain silent. Because then if you talk, you invalidate it. Yes?
What about when you're arrested and they sometimes give you like a sheet, or if you're arrested and they give you a sheet that they're asking you like questions like, do you have this tattoo, or are you in a program for alcohol, whatever, or they're asking you those questions. When you are arrested, you don't have to answer any of that or write anything either? Is that also?
So that's tricky. That's usually part of booking process, right? So when you get arrested, you get taken to the police station, and then there's sort of a booking process. For the most part, the things that you're going to put in those sheets and in that booking is not necessarily incriminating, right? But you have to be careful about what you're doing there. They have the right to ask those questions. You have the right to not answer those questions, right? So that is on you, right? So you have to determine for yourself whether you think this might be incriminating. So if they're asking about tattoos and they're looking for someone with a particular tattoo because they think that, you know, there's video surveillance that someone with that tattoo committed X crime in X place, right? Then that would be incriminating. So it's something you have to think about and rarely you know what they know because they're not going to tell you that. So it is something to keep in mind. That is very true. So I just said, don't ever answer, yes?
So if they ask you, can you show me so-and-so tattoos and so-and-so part, do you have to show them? Or can you say, no, I'm not going to show you? Because I have a friend who was booked for questioning, and they started asking them to show him their tattoos. And he didn't know what to do, so he showed them their tattoos. And I guess they were, like you said, they were looking for someone with a particular tattoo. But did he have the right to tell him, no, I'm not going to show you my tattoos, if they have them already in questioning inside of the police station?
So I'm going to give the short answer and the long answer to that. The long answer is no. The short answer is no, I mean. So no, right? Because that's sort of self-incrimination. And technically speaking, when you get arrested, you're not guilty of anything. Right? You're supposedly, right, innocent until proven guilty. And so you haven't sort of lost the host of rights that you would normally lose once you've been convicted of a crime, right? So let's say if you were sentenced to something, this is the long answer. So let's say if you were sentenced to something and you went to prison, a bunch of your rights sort of get stripped the moment you sort of get convicted of a crime, unfortunately, right? So you have less autonomy over your body, over your life, and what you can do, right? But before that happens, you still have, for the most part, all of your rights. They are curtailed, right? So you're not free to leave for certain exceptions, right? So if you're in police custody and then later you're in jail, Cook County Jail, right? There are limitations to your rights there, right? Because you have to get processed there. They then give you like new jumpsuits and stuff like that, right? So, yes and no, right? No, right? In the moment when you get arrested, you don't have to show those tattoos. You have a right to say no to that. You know, what their reaction is and what they might find out eventually, especially if you can't pay bond and you have to go into Cook County Jail, is also another matter, because once you're in jail, like actual jail, not just police lockup, because that's a distinction, right? Once you're there, that's a different matter, because you are now in custody, whether or not you've committed a crime. Okay? So, to the lovely woman in the back's question, right? You're welcome. To her question, right? It was about, you know, what can I give, right? So I know I just spent like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or something talking about how you should not talk to the police and only say, I will not talk, I want my lawyer. But I'm just about to tell you things that you can't tell the police. So it's name, date of birth, address, and if you're a minor, your parents' phone number, right? Minors have there's an extra obligation by police officers to attempt to contact parents. But this is the key here is attempt. It's not success. So oftentimes police officers will get to question minors without a parent being present because they couldn't reach the parent, right? So what the number of attempt is also vague, right? And it's all very, very vague, and so unfortunately that does happen, right? That said, all interrogations are supposed to be, yes, are supposed to be recorded, right? So those interrogations are recorded. That's why sometimes those interrogations get leaked. So I want to say a couple months ago, there were these two kids that got picked up, and the interrogation tapes were leaked, and they were in the news. And what was fascinating is you saw one of them, and he did not say, I will not talk, I want my lawyer. Police kept talking to him. The other kid who said, I'm not going to talk to you, I want my lawyer, I want a lawyer, the police almost immediately stopped talking to him, right? And his outcome at the end of that was way better than the other kid, right? And they were both juveniles, they were teenagers, right? So you can give name, date of birth, address, one second. Name, date of birth, address, and your parents' phone number. You can also give them, I guess, your phone number if you want to. If not, I don't think you're required to. This is all optional, right? I mean, short of you driving, like when you're driving, right, you have to have license and registration. That is an obligation that you have to have to present to a police officer. You're required to present. But even so, right, in the state of Illinois, you're not required to walk around with an ID. And technically, as long as you are licensed at the moment in which you're driving, you can get out of whatever ticket for not presenting a driver's license, as long as you were licensed at the moment in which you were driving, and you can present that to a judge. Now, do you want to go through the hassle of that? Probably not. So it's just a good idea to drive around with your license and registration, so that way, when you get stopped, it's easy and done. But in terms of walking on the street, you don't even have to have ID. It's a common misconception, right, that you have to have an ID. That you have to have your ID present with you. The police will often perpetuate this myth. It's not true, right? Because who does it also disadvantage? Any guesses? Undocumented and transgender people, right, who may not have identification that matches, right, how they identify and who they are, right? We're also talking about homeless people, right? It's really common for the police to take homeless people's possessions and throw them in the trash. The Department of Transportation also engages in a lot of that practice. And so a lot of homeless people have no identification on them, right? It's not illegal to not carry ID, okay?
In Illinois?
In Illinois. So in other places, so you guys are really close to Indiana. Indiana's a whole other thing, right? So
How about for Indiana?
I do not, I am not a licensed attorney in the state of Indiana, so I cannot give you legal advice about what happens in Indiana. That said, I do believe you have to in Indiana, but that I kind of heard from another attorney who lives in Indiana. That said, don't take that as legal advice, because I am not licensed in the state of Indiana, so I can't give you legal advice for the state of Indiana. Okay? Yes?
I know Chicago is a sanctuary city.
Sure.
So if they do want to turn you in with INS, what you should say or do.
Okay, so that is a slightly different presentation that I'm more than happy to give to you all in a hot second, but it's not super different from this, right? But just sort of to finish with this, the next couple slides, and then I'll get back to that question. Don't let me forget it, okay? So this is the information you want to give, right? But I do want to make it very clear and very distinct. So, for example, ma'am, what is your name?
Julia.
Julia, right. So, Julia, if I'm a police officer and I approach you and I say, where are you coming from, Julia? What is your answer to me?
I feel like I'm going to test it.
You are. Don't fail, Julia.
I'm about to fail already. I don't want to talk. I'm not going to talk. I mean, I
sure.
can say that.
Sure.
Silence is the thing, yeah.
Right.
I want my attorney.
Sure, okay. I say I will not talk. I want my lawyer, right?
Right.
The first thing you might want to say is something closer to, right, am I free to go?
That's true.
Right. When you're not free to go, you might want to say, I will not talk. I want my lawyer, right?
Right.
But, so to the question of where are you coming from, right, you don't want to answer that. Is that what I'm getting
I do
from you?
not. No.
Okay. What if I say, let's say, Julia, you're coming from home, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what if I, instead of asking you, where are you coming from, I ask you, where do you live?
No, I still don't want to give that information.
You don't want to give that information. No. That is your right? So you don't have to give me any of this information, but this information is not incriminating in and of itself, right?
I guess.
Where you live technically is not incriminating in of itself. It's public knowledge, right? I can look it up somewhere, right? If you have an ID at some point, I could subpoena the Department of State. I can get that information. It's not super hard to find out where you live. At some point during the booking process, I'm going to be asking that information. If it's not provided to me, I'll get it at some point, right? It's just going to be provided to me at some point within the process. So it's not incriminating information per se.
I shouldn't even be getting to a process though. I'm walking, right?
Yeah.
So I shouldn't even be at this point.
Right, at that
'Cause
point,
I don't have the answer,
At
right,
that point,
yeah.
no. But just know that the police sometimes, if they think they have, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but if they think they have probable cause, they might just take you to the police station and fingerprint you to identify you, right?
Okay.
What I want to try to get through is that there's a difference between this information and information that might put you in a time or place.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, would that give them if I gave an address, or would that make me be in a probable cause though? Because my address is where some kind of murder had occurred.
Not necessarily,
right?
not necessarily,
Yeah,
right? There's also what? There's also like 100 people within that block who live in that area. It's if you say, let's say for example, your address is 525 West Madison, okay? So you live in 525 West Madison. If you say, I just came from 525 West Madison, right? Or I just came from home, you put a time or place, right? Because I can say on average, on average people, it takes 5 minutes to get from that corner to this corner. The corner you came from is where your house is. Around that time, that's where this crime happened. Put you at a time or place. I'm gonna ask you some follow-up questions. But if the answer to the question, where do you live, is 525 West Madison, that's just public information. Because the truth is that there's hundreds of people that live around there that could have been, so at most I might ask you questions about whether you witnessed something, right? Now then you have to be careful about what information you want to give, because then you might incriminate yourself, but that in and of itself is not incriminating, right? Your name in and of itself is not incriminating technically, right? Yes?
So for sure, you don't have to give your name, date of birth, or address, even if you're in handcuffs?
Yes, you don't have to, but know that this is the deal. You are not required to give this information. I'll get to your question in a second, Emma. You're not required to give this information, but it might make your life a little easier, and that is a choice that I leave up to you all. There's so little in this process that is actually your choice, and so when I do these presentations, I always present it as it's your choice, whether you want to give this information to them. That said, they're going to be able to find out this information when they fingerprint you, especially if you have priors, through the booking process or later on, right? They'll get this information at some point. This information is essentially practically public knowledge, especially nowadays with social media and the internet and the way it works, okay? But you're not legally required to do so, at least not in the state of Illinois. Did I answer everyone's questions about this?
Yes.
Okay, the last thing I want to say about this is that do not give a fake name. Do not give a fake name. Please, please, please don't do it. The reason is because I've had to go to police stations where I then ask for John Doe, and they go, oh, well, John Doe told me he was Joe Doe, right? And so now John Doe gets hit with, right, obstruction of identification, which is another charge, right? So let's say whatever they arrested you for, they don't even get to fully charge you with. They can now charge you for obstruction of identification because you gave a false name, right? You see it happen a lot with resisting arrest. Sometimes the rest of the charges for why I stopped you, right, are bogus, but because you sort of fought the arrest, then you get hit with resisting arrest, right? So we don't want you to be in a situation where you could have gotten out of it with no real record, and then all of a sudden you have a charge on you, or have another charge put on top of you, okay? All right, so now we're at searches, okay? So let's say I want to search you, right? Let's see, what is this slide? Okay. So what would you say if I'm a police officer and I want to do a search?
Yeah.
And not consent to the search.
Do you have a warrant?
Without a warrant. Do you have a warrant? Okay. Say that again? Gotcha. Okay. So the answer is exactly what I said. I do not consent to any searches. We do emphasize any. That's why it's in the underline. We say we do not consent to any searches. Why? Any guesses?
Incriminating evidence, or they could be planning on something on you sometimes.
Maybe they
Anything,
could plan something, sure.
It's possible.
Possible, you
Just
never
to
know.
set them up for a future thing.
Possibly, yes. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Como? Sorry? You could have something that they're not looking for. You could have something that they're not looking for.
You may not be
Great
aware
answer.
of everything that's in your car.
You may not be aware of everything that's in your car. Both great answers, yes. Sorry,
It'll
what?
protect you even if you keep searching later.
Okay, it'll protect you and they keep searching later. Great answer.
Protection of private property.
Protection if you're on private property. Sure, yeah. So all of those are wonderful answers. And I can tell y'all carry a lot of people in your car and you're like, I don't know who's been in my car. I do not consent to any searches is exactly what you always want to do, right? Why? It's because of exactly everything you all said. You do not know what you might have. And I don't even mean anything like, I don't even mean like drugs or a weapon, right? I'm talking about like a
Needles.
Say that again?
Like, my grandfather has diabetes. He has
Needles, right?
there's
Diabetes,
there's
sure.
needles in my car. My grandfather was in my car.
Sure, exactly, right?
Yeah.
There could be needles. It could be a receipt, right?
Right.
You could have a receipt for a corner store that got mugged, that there was an armed robbery literally 5 minutes after you left, right? Time and place, right? So you don't know what could actually get you incriminated. So even you're like, you know what, I didn't do anything, search me, right? But you never know what could possibly be incriminating you. You also have a right to your property, right? So to the gentleman in the back's point, right? The Fourth Amendment right, this is what calls for the Fourth Amendment right, against unreasonable searches and seizures, right? You have a right to your private property and to your person. And so anytime the state, that is, in this case, the police as a representative of the state, anytime the state infringes upon that, they have to have a reason for it, right? So I do not consent to any searches, and you always want to say this, even if they have a warrant, right? You also want to ask for a warrant, especially if they're coming to your house. Especially if they're at your house, right? There's very few exceptions in which the police are able to enter your home without a warrant, so you always want to ask for a warrant. But even if they show you a warrant, right? Even if you think that they have the right to search you legally, always say, I do not consent to any searches. Because the truth is that we never know whether the search is actually valid or not. Who decides whether the search is valid? Any guesses? The judge. Perfect. The judge is a person who decides whether a search is valid. So even if the police officer believes the search is valid, even if the police officer has a valid warrant, if the grounds for the warrant aren't valid, the warrant itself isn't valid and the search is not valid. If the police officer goes beyond the scope of the warrant, goes beyond the requirements of the warrant, then that search is not valid. And what happens to when a search is not valid? What happens to whatever evidence they find?
It's thrown out.
It's thrown out, right? So in Illinois, it's called suppressing evidence. The evidence gets suppressed, right? It gets thrown out. And sometimes that can be all you need to then have the case dismissed, okay? So you always want to say, I do not consent to any searches. Always, always, always. Because, it might mean that the end of your case, or it might mean that whatever is being charged against you gets lessened. It might mean that whatever plea deal or whatever conviction is a smaller sentence, right? It's just all to help you out at the end, right? We don't know what the outcome will be, but you always want to say, I do not consent to any searches, okay? I'm not saying, barricade your house, with your body in front of the police officer. You also then don't want to get charged with a bunch of other things. But simply saying, I do not consent to any searches is sufficient legally. Yes?
if they're already inside your building, do you
Mhm.
have to open your apartment door?
No, that is private property. So the building itself technically is private property. It's owned by the landlord, right? But you have an expectation of privacy within your apartment unit. So even if they have access to the building, it does not mean that you consented to access to your living space. You have a certain expectation of privacy. That's why street arrests are easier and don't require a warrant, is because the degree of expectation of privacy is different, right? If you're on the street corner, right, you have no expectation of privacy. But if you're in your home, even if you're a renter, you have a right there, right? And the police can only enter either through a warrant or through an exception, right? There has to be an exception. There's a list of them. But mostly it's like they think something bad is happening there, and the only way to stop it is if they walk through, and usually someone has to be in extreme danger, or it's called exigent circumstances, is a legal term. So, or like they're chasing after you. So let's say that I'm chasing after you, and then you run into your apartment. I already set the grounds for why I can search you and arrest you. So all I'm doing is following through. You don't all of a sudden get a magic shield when you enter your door, right? So you want to make sure, so that's a way that they can get around that as well, okay? But there's a bunch of other exceptions to that. Anything else? Cool. So, different kinds of searches. And then we're gonna talk about, okay, so I'm gonna try to get through this rather quickly because I can't even see a clock, so I don't even know what my time is. But,
405.
okay. So, thank you. Pat downs and searches. So, really quickly, because this can get really complicated legally, and I don't think you guys all need all of that legal jargon, but essentially, this is the case, right? If I'm a police officer and I approach you, right, I'm approaching you and asking you questions, right? I legally have a right to do that as a police officer, and it's usually under the reasonable suspicion, right? So I have to have reasonable suspicion, right? Which is where a reasonable officer believes that you're engaging in criminal activity, and like it says, it doesn't require hard evidence, right? So an example I might have is, let's say I'm driving, it's late at night, I'm a police officer, and I hear on the radio that there was an armed robbery of a corner store, 5 blocks east of me. And they tell me the description of the person they think it is. As I'm driving, I spot someone that matches the description that I think of the person. That person is 5 blocks away from where it happened, and the incident happened, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago. So it's reasonable for me to suspect that that person might be who the police are looking for. So that's usually enough for reasonable suspicion. As I'm approaching you and start talking to you to ask you questions because I have reasonable suspicion, that's what's called a Terry stop. You don't really know what that is, but essentially, I have a right to now briefly stop you, detain you, to ask you questions. In that interaction, in that brief interaction, if I don't establish enough grounds for me to be able to arrest or fully search you, I have to leave you alone. Now, we know that doesn't always happen, but that is what the law is, okay? When I'm engaging with you, right, I know that depending on what the situation is, the context, the circumstances, I might reasonably believe that you have a weapon on you, and so I might pat you down for my safety, right, as a police officer. So when you look at pat downs, right, the TSA person patting this woman down, this pat down is supposed to be for my safety as a police officer, right? So not every questioning of an individual requires a pat down. The pat down is only required when I think you might be carrying a weapon, okay? But my suspicion that you have a weapon has to be reasonable, okay? So let's say I'm jogging and I'm wearing, I don't know, leggings and a tank top or something like that. It's a summer day, right? And I'm wearing leggings, right? I'm wearing leggings, yoga pants or whatever, and a tank top, and I'm running. There's no reasonable expectation, right, that I'm carrying a weapon on me. Those clothes are pretty tight-fitting. At that point, if I'm patting you down, it's just sexual harassment, right? I'm just feeling you up. But if it's, but if you're wearing, hi, hello. But if if you maybe have looser clothing, you're in a quote unquote high crime area, and I think you might be connected to a crime, I might say, I'm gonna pat you down anyway for my safety, right? The pat down is only supposed to be with your fingers, right, on the outside of your clothing. They're not supposed to manipulate your pockets to look for anything else. They're not supposed to go into your groin. They're not supposed to do none of that. They're just supposed to do the outside. So that's why this TSA person is a great example. Ooh. That's why the TSA person is a great example, because they don't do anything else other than pat you down, right? So that is really what the pat down is, your fingertips outside of your clothing. A fuller search with this person stealing this man's wallet requires probable cause. So if I do a full search where I'm going into your pockets, where I'm going into your car, where I'm going to your house, where I arrest you, I am required to have what's called probable cause, right? So probable cause is, as this slide says, requires specific facts and circumstances that I believe connects you to a crime, right? So it's not enough. So before, I suspected that you might be connected to a crime, but now, so I want you to think of reasonable suspicion, probable cause as a spectrum, right? From 0 to 100. So reasonable suspicion is like 20%. Probable cause is like 50% over, right? And it can be an accumulation of things. So in the example I said before, where the guy was, connected to the possible armed robbery of a corner store. If I find a receipt from that corner store in his pocket, or I find a gun, or I'm patting down and I feel the gun, and I pull out the gun and the gun is the same make and model that was described in the armed robbery, I now have enough probable cause to arrest the person. But let's say you're walking down the street and, I don't know, some form of drug falls from your pocket and I witness it, that's also probable cause, right? That's 100% certainty that I know that you had illegally possession of a controlled substance, right? A drug. So probable cause functions along that spectrum, and once I have probable cause, I can do a full search and I can even arrest you, okay? So does anyone have any questions about that at this moment? No? Cool. So, okay. So when you call our number, right, that's the actual digits, so 1-800-LAW-REP4. What's going to happen is when you call is you're going to get directed to an attorney who will then go to the police station and represent you, okay? So where do most of our phone calls come from, do you think?
Probably not the police station.
Who do you think most of our calls come from? Anyone? Thank you, Emma. The police station, possibly. Anywhere else? By whom? Any guess, truly?
I can't think of a police station.
Family, friends, parents. Thank you. That is the answer. You win a prize. I have no prizes for you. Okay, I'll be done in 5. So when you call that number, most of it is friends, family, loved ones, right? Because people don't often get a phone call right away when they go to the police station, and sometimes they don't get access to the phone until hours later, right? The most successful police stations I've ever done have been because a loved one called immediately when they were arrested, and I showed up to the police station almost at the same time that they did, right? So I got access to them before even the police were able to question them beyond the booking process, right? So please call. I have Eddie has cards that he's going to pass out. They have our number on them, and they also have some Know Your Rights information in the back, which is what I said. So before I get into the whole sanctuary city thing, because I promised you I would say that, I want you to all say these words with me. All right? So if I'm a police officer and I approach you, what is the first thing you want to say to me? Am I free to go? Beautiful. All right, the next one with a little bit more enthusiasm. So if I were to ask you some questions, right, what is your answer? I will not talk, yeah.
I want
And
my
I
lawyer.
want my lawyer. Perfect. I will not talk. I want my lawyer. I think third time will be the charm. Let's get there, people. So then if I'm going to search you, I'm going to pat you down, what is it that you want to say to me?
I do not not consent any searches.
Perfect. I do not consent to any searches. Can you repeat that back to me?
I do not consent to any searches.
All right. So what is our number? 1-800-LAW-REP-4. That's REP4. Okay. So this is the digits if you like legit really just want the digits, but if you mark it, you're fine. So 1-800-LAW-REP-4. And the 4 pieces of information that you're allowed to give a police officer if you're going to give them any information is name, date of birth, address, phone number. Oh, one last thing about that. So some exceptions to why you may not want to give that, other than just because you don't want to, is that you may believe you have a warrant out for your arrest. And so if you believe that that is the case, you may want to think twice about information you give the police officer, because then they have to arrest you on the spot, right? And so if you want to sort of execute the warrant later, there are ways for you to get your house in order, make sure everything's okay, so that you're not sort of snatched and then your kids are waiting for you at daycare or something, right? So we want to make sure that people, when they go in on their warrants, that they organize things the best way possible. And the other possibility is, right, and then I'll go to the sanctuary city part, is if you're undocumented, right? Sometimes it can be really hard to know, especially if you are Spanish monolingual and don't sort of know the difference between the different systems, whether this is a Chicago police officer or whether this is ICE, right? Because ICE will often have vests and will have jackets and stuff that say police on them. So you think, oh, okay, police, policia, got it. There are police, there's a sanctuary city, I'm safe, right? And that's not necessarily always the case, right? The purpose of sanctuary cities oftentimes are to reduce fear in the population so that they do actually use the police when there are emergency situations, and so things don't get out of control, right? That's sort of the goal as a policy. And so what they do is they don't share information between the police and ICE and immigration, right? They're not supposed to call. It's not like if you get arrested, they don't just call ICE and then they show up. It is also true though that ICE does monitor some arrests and people's records, and sometimes your arrest, for depending on the crime, could make you inadmissible and trigger a deportation for you, right? So I've spoken to people in detention centers. I also do a little bit of immigration law. So I've spoken to people in immigration detention centers where they were like, I got arrested, I got out, I walked out of the building, and then ICE was there waiting for me, right? So you want to be careful about information you give the police. As to what you tell the police, it's essentially what I told you now. What you tell ICE is essentially the same thing, right? You have a right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Now, you don't have a right to get one provided for you. Unfortunately, the laws of this country do not afford you an attorney for free, but you have a right to ask for one. You have a right to have one. You just don't have a right for the state to give you one. So there are a lot of attorneys out there, some private, some public, that you can try and contact, right? Some resources out there if you want an attorney to represent you or a loved one in immigration detention centers and removal proceedings, just deportation proceedings, essentially. So the other thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes when they do raids or they go to people's homes, and sometimes people will get rounded up within that process, is they will say, I have a warrant, and you ask for it. You have to, I don't have slides for that because I didn't come prepared for this, but there are examples of how judicial warrants should look like. If it's not a judicial warrant signed by a judge, you do not have a right to enter your home without your consent. The moment you open the door and let them come in, you've given them consent, right? You've revoked your right, and then they can walk in, right? So you want to be careful that they're using a judicial warrant before you allow them into your home, right? Oftentimes what they call a warrant is essentially this, it's like a warrant, but it's an administrative piece of paper from an immigration officer. That is not a judicial warrant. That is not enough for them to have access to your home, okay? So you want to be careful with that, right? You're going to want to say something to the effect of, do you have a warrant? Can you pass the warrant under the door? Or can you show it, in the thing? Because you want to get a good look at it. You want to make sure that the warrant is a valid warrant and that it's a judicial warrant, okay? Don't sign anything when you're in immigration detention center. Don't sign anything. because sometimes people will get deported because they signed a voluntary departure form. It basically says like, oh, I voluntarily chose to leave. And they didn't realize that that's what they signed up for, and then all of a sudden they're on a flight to Mexico City. Okay? Does anyone have any questions before I stop talking? Yes?
For what you were talking about just now, can they approach you at the airport? Like, let's say you're going to Mexico, and you're not here legally, so they can approach you like at the airport and you can sign that. They don't know.
So, I mean, part of the problem is that airports are tricky because you are technically at a port of entry. The moment you go to an airport, it's as if you're on the border. So imagine, if you will, all the rights that you have at the border is the same one you have at an airport, because it's a port of entry. Same thing with a seaport, right? They're all called ports of entry. So, TSA, the Border Patrol, and ICE all are sort of in pretty much most airports. Usually, if you're just sort of passing through, like it shouldn't be a big issue, like if you're just going, but you might get pulled aside. The real risk oftentimes that happens at airports is, let's say you're one of the random people that gets pulled aside, right, and you get patted down, or they search your bag, maybe you get asked questions, and then they start looking at your documentation, right, and you don't have you have a Mexican passport, or maybe you have a Guatemalan passport, you have a Panamanian passport, whatever your passport is, and you don't have a U.S. passport, and there might be some follow-up questions, right? So it really depends on each individual TSA officer and what's sort of happening there, okay? And so it is true, though, that if they realize that you are undocumented, right, it just sort of depends, right? So, like, if you have a round-trip ticket back, you might not be able to get back. But if you have a one-way ticket, they might just be like, okay, bye, and document the fact that you've left, right? Because it is held against you. So coming to the United States without inspection, which means without documentation, is held against you in terms of for immigration purposes, which could make you inadmissible. But if you go back and then you return, it is a separate thing that actually makes your situation worse, technically speaking. So if you were to later then apply for immigration relief to get some sort of status, you often have to get a waiver that tells the government, I crossed the border, or I came to the U.S. these many times without inspection, and get those each forgiven, because they could bar you for 10 years from entering the country, right? So I don't want to get too specific about it, because it really depends on each situation and each person. Immigration law is very complicated, but just know that going in and out can increase your risk of not essentially getting some sort of status. But it's all waivable to an extent, and it just depends on the situation. Any other questions before I get the boot? Okay. All right. So remember the magic words. Remember a number. The cards are there. I'm going to leave some cards here for all of you so that you can take and share them with your loved ones, no matter where they are. And know now, though, that the Public Defender's Office is going to be doing it. So if you are in a suburban Cook County, you can get an attorney to go to the police station now, right? So whereas before you were limited to go to the counties, we mostly only did Chicago. If you get arrested in Cook County, they have jurisdiction over those areas, right? So this is something to know, especially since you guys are pretty far south. I wouldn't be surprised that there are people that live here or work here and live elsewhere, and vice versa, right? Yes?
So when we call 1-800-LAW-REP4, now it's not FDLA that comes, now it's who that comes?
The Cook County Public Defender's Office. They have a 24-hour unit, but they are trained. For it. They've had it for a while. We've been in communication with them, and there's a lot of possible benefits to that, right? So if you think about it this way, statistically speaking, the majority of people who get arrested and have to go to court don't have the money or the funds to afford an attorney, a private attorney. They're going to get a public defender. So you're going to have an attorney, and you're going to be a client, essentially, of the Public Defender's Office from the beginning to the end. right? So there's a level of consistency, whereas before, we would go to the police station to present you, but then we would get all that documentation and notes to the public defender's office, right? So there was sort of a warm handoff. But now, it's straight through, you're part of that system. They're also a state actor, right? So there's a level of, I think, of accountability that it can increase between when, if I have a problem with a desk sergeant, right, or a police officer, I can complain all I want, but I have no leverage. But if I were a public defender and I walk in and I'm getting regular problems with the 5th district, right, I can tell my supervisors, we're regularly having problems with this district, and this desk sergeant is giving us a lot of crap. Then all of a sudden, people above me are having conversations with people above whoever I have a problem with, right? That doesn't happen very well with a nonprofit agency and a state actor. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of possible benefits that can come from this. We have been in negotiation with them in terms of the training, how that works, and they've been running their 24-hour unit in tandem with ours for the last year, I want to say. Okay?
So what are non-benefits of having public defenders? Have you seen a downside?
In my mind, the only true downside is that we have a limited amount of influence with them once they get started, right? With all agencies and organizations, once you start something, you then want to preserve as much autonomy over your own project. And so it's been hard since then to continue in communications with them. Whereas before, as we were trying to hand off the calls to them, it was increased communication. But I will say this, that we know a lot of people who are in that special unit, who are on the ground level, who used to work for FDLA and now work there. And we have good relationships with the higher ups, like Amy Campanelli and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really good work that's being done there. And the truth is, it's really hard to mess up the station visits. It truly is. Because all you really do, truthfully, is you show up, you say who you are and who you're there for. I then go talk to my client, usually in an interview room. And the interview room is like it's kind of like in the movies where there's like a glass panel, right? And then there's like a speech box somewhere around me, and I have to like yell into this speech box and be like, "Hello, my name is Gerald. I'm your attorney." I barely ever get to look at them in the face because I have to scream into this box, right? So and all I'm really talking to them about is their rights. And I get them to sign a form that says that I'm your attorney and that no one can talk to you without an attorney being present. Show that to the desk sergeant signs it, I get a copy, they get a copy, the client gets a copy, and everyone goes about their life, right? But what that does is it allows the police to be on notice that they are, that there's an attorney present, that they can't question him or her without me, right? And it allows me access to be able to tell the person, do not talk to the police, right? Which then helps them out, and it helps curb the possibility of police misconduct, right? Because there's outside eyes and ears. It's on record that I'm there. Okay. I think I'm done. If this were the Oscars, the music would be blaring. So you guys have to go. I have to go. But it was a pleasure to speak with you all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Very informative.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to have a Little Billy Solidarity Network, and they're going to give us some information about what is going on with INS and with the detention center where they have the kids locked up. There's about 11 places here in Chicago, in Illinois, and they're making a new one on Dwight, Illinois, a huge one. The biggest one in the middle west, in the east coast.
Okay.
Okay, Rosalinda from Little Billy's Network.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me without the mic?
No, we need the mic. No, we don't need the mic. Yeah.
This is Coco. This is Mini Coco. She's Lulu. No. So hi. So thank you to the Brown Berets for inviting us. We've known each other for a hot minute now, and I've done a few actions together and a few workshops together.
So as a Little Village Solidarity Network, there's a lot of work that we do, but I think for today, we wanted to briefly mention one particular thing we're working on, and that is the ongoing struggle to completely shut down all the child detention centers nationally, to push for the decriminalization and decarceration of all immigrant kids that are being held in custody in the United States. And it so happens that locally in Chicago, we have two operators that are social service agencies, and that's Heartland Alliance and the Catholic Archdiocese, that operate detention centers that specialize in detaining migrant children. And so we can talk about different things today, depending on what people want to hear. We could talk about the why, like how is it possible that these centers exist and how they work and how we arrived, like where did this structure come from and how come we didn't know about it. We could also talk about what people are doing to confront it and where that fight is at now. So that's like sort of two kinds of things we can talk about. What do you want to bring up? And then y'all can shout which one you want the most of.
Detention centers.
Yeah, so like Rosalinda had previously stated, we're here in solidarity with you all, but also trying to recruit more activity against the detention centers, the baby jails, which also lead up to the detention centers of adults, and they're not sure if it's going to be families either, children either, in Dwight, Illinois.
Currently in the United States, there's over 100 facilities that specialize in detaining undocumented youth, so undocumented folks that are minors, that are under 18. They're technically known as undocumented alien children, UAC, that's what the U.S. government calls it, the UAC program. And there's a bunch of language around this system that is really misleading, right? So they will call these facilities shelters that care for children. They do not say these are detention centers that imprison children. They say these are shelters that care for children. But when you really look at the way these children are apprehended, the fact that once they're apprehended by Homeland Security, they are given a notice to appear, which signals that the federal government is intending to initiate deportation proceedings against them. So these children are being prosecuted, essentially, right? And as part of their prosecution, they are held in these facilities called shelters. The vast majority of these children, according to the federal government's own reports, have adult loved ones who could come to wherever they've been apprehended, right, and help them and house them and host them and say, yes, this child can come with me. I'm a parent, or I'm an uncle, or I'm an aunt. But they're not given that opportunity. The first move of the government is to detain these kids, often far away from the place where they're apprehended. So they're flown across the country and detained in a place like Chicago, even though they were detained maybe, let's say, in Texas or Arizona. And then once they're detained, a process of investigation starts to happen, whereby their story or their information that they have loved ones, they know the phone numbers of their loved ones, my mom, her name is this, her phone number is this, all of this is investigated. So the child is investigated and the families are investigated. And these investigations can take a long time. They can take many months. They can take years sometimes. The social service agencies, right? These are run by social service agencies. They're not run by ICE. The social service agencies claim that what they're doing is merely housing and sheltering children that have nowhere to go, as opposed to taking children from families who could care for them and investigating the children's and the family's claims that this is their relationship before they release them. So this is kind of the loop that's been created, right? Locally in the Chicago metro region, we have Heartland Alliance as the biggest operator, and Heartland is seen as, it's a multi-million-dollar NGO that's seen as the good guy. They're a social service agency, with many tentacles, right? They're like many-headed hydra or something. And one of the branches of Heartland Alliance is, they call it Child Services or Youth and Residential Services, which is this their business that specializes in detaining migrant children. It's important for us to note that Heartland is not a minor player in this. So last fiscal year, It was a $1.6 billion a year industry at the federal level, this industry of this business of detaining kids, migrant kids. And Heartland was the operator that received the second largest contract from the federal government. So they're a highly influential player in this business. So our campaign is to pressure Heartland, first of all, to put them out in the open that this is what they're doing, that they're building a business model based on detaining, prosecuting, and processing kids. And also to force them, once we get this out, to force them to shut down, to force them to sort of stop profiteering off of that. Because if we can make a big push against one of the big operators, the entire structure, right? It's about taking on the entire structure, and it's about insisting on a total decriminalization and a total decarceration of all immigrants, starting with the kids. And we want to start with the kids because all this outrage around Trump's child separation and family separation was an opportunity and an obligation for us to explode the truth of the situation. Instead of saying, oh, it's only these few thousand kids that Trump separated, right? It's actually tens of thousands of kids and hundreds of thousands of kids. And they were detained under Obama, and they're being detained now. So we have to push back against this, even though it's the more humanitarian way of detaining people. And some of these shelters call themselves really nice, and they say, look, but we have English classes, and look, but we have these services, right? We want to insist on the fact that these children deserve these services without being locked up. They shouldn't be locked up first and then given health services or English classes or art classes or workshops. They should be given these services while they and their families are free. And their families should consent to whatever services these children are given, right? So, and that conversation is a community conversation. And that's where sort of these problems need to be addressed. Not in the boardrooms of NGOs that, you know, are basically sitting on the same side of the equation as the federal government's enforcement agencies. So anyway, I'm hoping Emily will have more to say. And baby.
So of course we're going to open it up in a bit for questions and conversation, but I'm sure the majority of us believe we can imagine what a concentration camp or a baby jail would consist of. And some of us have been on the outside of them, luckily. Yes, this is going to get some flyers right now, but so stories that have been leaking, we have had conversations with people working on the inside, and luckily, to our benefit and the benefit of educating our communities, there's been, of course, horrific stories of abuse, and now more stories of sexual abuse are coming out, which is not surprising once we understand the system that we're dealing with. This is a system that has been going on these lands to our bodies from the beginning of invasion. But now there's also stories of children from Tornillo that they're telling their own stories. Oh, Lulu has something to say. She doesn't like baby jails. No, yucky baby jails. From our youth, straight from the mouth of our youth. Yeah, I work better more with a conversation than with just talking to you all. So does anybody have any questions, please?
First thing, can you name the locations off too? I would love to capture so people could visualize how close.
So
there's also all the flyers in the back. Anybody can take as many also.
You want to read the Sure. There's a Bronzeville location, Rogers Park, Englewood, Beverly, Des Plaines. You want? 3500 South Giles is the Bronzeville. Rogers Park is 1628 West Morris and 1620 West Chase. Englewood is 7351 South Princeton. Beverly 1209 West 98th Street. And
98 and Vicence. South Vicence.
Okay.
yeah. So there's the 1150 North River Road. These are the ones in Des Plaines, which
Okay, you don't have to name all of them, but it was just I wanted people to get more understanding how close this is to us. As I was saying first, when you look at it on TV, you thinking a lot of this is so far away when it's right in front of you. Yeah, thank you. Right, so that's why I really just wanted you to get some idea that these communities are around us. They here, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are in residential neighborhoods. They're like right at the same block or right across the street from where people live. They're in like the one on South Giles. It's a former residential home. I know we were talking about that, and it still says no. It's from a nursing home. It still says nursing home on it, right? And so it's not like there's a big sign saying we, detain children here, right? But so it's a lot closer. All the struggle. Like immigration enforcement in its most dramatic and draconian form isn't just happening at the border. It's happening right here in the city. And once we see Chicago as that kind of border enforcement town, then we can also see Chicago as a border abolition town, a border struggle town too, right? So they came into our neighborhoods, so it's time for us to kick them out of our neighborhoods, right?
They're sporadically throughout the Chicagoland area that everyone can become involved. There's been many different types of rallies set outside of these locations. And hello again.
And in this lanes, I don't know if I missed this. Right?
No, you did good. They were just giving people an idea. I mean, because I know you have more on there, but that's
in this lanes. Did I miss the part where did you already talk about that they're shutting down four different centers? Supposedly they're calling it four. But then the Catholic Archdiocese and Maryville Academy are trying to pick that slack up, and they're trying to build more detention centers to hold them. So while that's great that Heartland realizes they can't just keep this up because of the pressure on them, which is good to keep the pressure. While they're starting to fold, then Maryville Academy, and the Catholic Archdiocese is connected to that, so people can start to put pressure, or have been putting pressure, I should say. If anybody wants to talk about that pressure.
Do you want to sit here? Maybe Jorge wants one of you to speak about your experiences.
Are they allowed like time, like recess or time to go outside, or is it all regulated?
They have a very structured schedule every 20. They have a very structured schedule. Every 20 to 30 minutes is structured, right? From wake up, shower, clean the bathrooms, scrub the bathrooms, eat. Class, there are 6 hours of mandatory class per day, Monday through Friday, which is we can talk about what kind of schooling and class takes place in these places. There's vocational training, there's different kinds of supposed recreation activities, and going out, outdoor time in the yard, right? Mom.
And on the day after their birthday, in the middle of the night, when they turn 18, they are sent to a detention center. So this is an adult detention center. The Land of the Free sends these children, asylum-seeking children, to a more physical, brutal detention center. Besides the 6 hours of hypocritical education that the United States gives these children about what a beautiful land this is and whatever other jargon they feed them. One of the detention centers in Rogers Park houses mothers and their children. Because we're speaking of under 18, so there are mothers and their children, who knows, 16, 17, 18, 17. And if, like our friend was saying that the houses usually seem indescribable. You can't imagine that they are prisons, but once you notice the structure, there will be a fence around them. The children will, in our sing-alongs we've had outside, the children will come to the windows and show their face or their hand, and then they'll be whisked away and the curtains will be shut. It's heartbreaking, and so we encourage you all to take your own steps to show them solidarity, that they are not only in the shadows, but they are also a part of the community. Many of the children are from Central America or Bangladesh or Romanian children. It's a variety. South African children, and of course children from Mexico are just sent directly back.
We sometimes get questions because depending on where we go to do, sometimes we have longer workshops where we try to break down how did we arrive here? How was the UAC system built? What are the policies that build it? What are the budgets, right? How is it justified? And sometimes we have people say, or we'll just go in a more social way and we try to talk about this. And we've gotten lots of questions like, but what would happen with these children if Heartland didn't house them? Where would they be? And we say, well, they would be with their loved ones, right? And then we have people who would say, but they seem to be well cared for in these centers because look, Heartland said that they offer dental services, for example, right, for free. And so we try to explain that none of these children arrived there because they or their families requested help. It's not like people go to Heartland, knock on the door and say, can you please help support me? I have some needs and I'm not able to meet them, right? These are children that were apprehended by Department of Homeland Security agents, were processed for immigration violations, have been given a notice to appear, which means that they are under prosecution, and only after that are taken in custody by force by federal ICE agents to these facilities. And then there is a transfer made, a transfer of custody from directly ICE custody to the custody of another federal agency, HHS, Health and Human Services, right? And Heartland operates under that part of the federal government. But the entire time the kids are in these places, they are not free to leave. Their parents cannot call them. They do not have phone privileges whenever they want to. They have a lot less freedom and a lot less access to rights than a lot of people do in the federal prison system or in jails, right? That's one thing to remember. Yeah.
What if the children have like allergies or they need, let's say they get sick? Do they force them to get a flu shot or what?
There's a lot of, Heartland says we give them a lot of health services, right? And then you have to think about what those health services are. There are medical inspections, they are vaccinated, right, without consent. They are medicated without consent. There are clinicians and sort of medical specialists hired by Heartland. There's like one clinician for the whole
there's a lot of
system.
people profiting off of these children.
Right. There's a couple of dentists that they hire, right? But it's at the discretion of the social service agency and of the procedures of HHS what kind of treatments are done on these children. It has nothing to do with consent given by their families as to whether, so a lot of these children suffer from extreme forms of depression, right? Because mental health issues, right? And Heartland says, well, they have mental health issues because of the traumas of the violence they experienced in home country or the traumas of when they crossed. They don't say, and the traumas of being held in a kid prison by us, not knowing when they're going to see their loved ones, right? They go through all this suffering and risk to cross in order to reunify with parents, right, or loved ones. They get apprehended, kidnapped by the federal government, basically, held against their will. They don't know when they're going to be out. It's an indefinite detention. So they don't acknowledge that this is in of itself traumatizing. So when the kids, quote, act up, there's a process by which this special incident report is issued by Heartland. It puts the kids under a different regime of surveillance, monitoring for their well-being, and it triggers like a whole bunch of problems that they have in terms of expediting their case.
So are there children that try to run away?
There are kids who try to run away. There are kids who try to not comply with the rules. The rules include have fun. Now is playtime. You must enjoy yourself. Now is snack time, right? Now is bedtime, right? Now is class participatory art time, right? And a lot of kids just break down and cry and say, I don't want to draw a turkey. I want my mom, right? There are kids who refuse to eat. These are seen as problem behaviors. These are seen as bad kids who don't comply, and they get threatened. Hey, your case is going to be delayed, right?
hey, oh, the ones who repeatedly don't comply are liable to become medicated against their will. And there have been plenty of examples of psychotropic drugs being issued to kids. They don't need drugs, they need to be released, right? So all of these, if you define this as care, then any non-compliant behavior on the part of the children is something that has to be corrected, right? Whereas if you define this as a prison system, the children are resisting. Children refusing food is a hunger strike. They just don't have the language to call it that way, right? Children refusing to play and have fun is also a way of calling the sheep a sheep, calling it for what it is, right? And children trying to run away, which happens frequently, is also something that we should be supporting. Kids who try to run away and are caught get in a whole lot of trouble. They get transferred to more secure facilities. Those facilities are in collaboration with local police task forces, particularly gang-related task forces. There's a lot of follow-up on those kids after they're released. And all the kids who are released while under deportation proceedings. If you're a parent who have lost your kid because the government has kidnapped your kid, pass them on to Heartland to hold the kid for you, right? For them, to administer the kidnapping. By the time your child is returned to you, they are returned to you much more traumatized, and they are returned to you now a child under prosecution, under deportation proceedings. And when Heartland says, but look how many kids we released, and cynically they say, we reunified children with their families. When the kidnapper says, well, once we get ransom, we send the kid back, they call that reunification. And we keep trying to say what you're doing is these children are not free. They are sent home under a really extraordinarily violent situation of the slow violence of deportation proceedings. Only now, the federal government also has the biometrics of their families because they've been investigating them. Families are forced to give, they no longer have to give fingerprints now, woohoo. But they used to have to give biometric information and all kinds of information on themselves and the extended family network. So the difference between these kids coming and being allowed to reunify with their families and them being sabotaged by being held in custody and then transferred for detention is huge. Huge amounts of harm happens in that time frame, whether that time frame is 3 months or a year and a half, right? And there's no way in hell to call that care and protection. Yeah.
I got many feelings about this. One, as African Americans, that's a whole nother kind of conversation in a sense, because it's still like some form of slavery to me, whether people want to not get that or not, but it seems like some form of slavery. But as a person that once was a caseworker for foster care, being a caseworker, I guess I'm saying that I totally agree with you saying the community should be more involved, especially with Heartland. If the kids are there in this shelter that they call it, community should be more aware and more involved. But I guess what bothers me, even as a caseworker, I was the bottom. It's like I feel like Heartland is the bottom when the real problem is at top. And I'm like, how do you? Because I felt totally like my hands were tied as a caseworker of cases of stuff I didn't agree with the system or what it did or whatever. I was at the bottom. And I was still the foot soldier though. I was still like, okay, I got to make sure this kid is okay. I got to make sure they're getting fed or is this family being all right? I feel like, I hate to use Heartland because I know they are big business, but I'm just saying they being the caseworker at this moment. Because Trump, the president who's on top, has made this rule. Has came down from Trump, ICE, whatever, and it's been going on, you're right, longer than Trump, but Obama, all that. I was just using him as the quickest, get to the point. It's like it seems like the problem is so much at the top. Do you have any idea how we can, I don't know, it's the answer, can we get that top head cut off some kind of way?
I guess, right. Like you were saying, it's systematic. This has been going on. Family separations on these lands, your people, our people. Right. And so what we need to do is resist. We need to organize and we need to educate. We need to, at every level, every alderman that have these homes, these baby jails in their neighborhoods, we need to approach them and we need to continue to pressure them and everything, take it into your own hands.
And I guess,
Father them, you,
and I guess that's what I think to me in community when it comes to Heartland, because this is, still comes back to this. That policy still exists, and the children have to go somewhere. Now, if they're sitting in the community in somehow like prisons, what do the community, even at that level,
Right.
can be more involved to watch them and help them or get the parents to see something here?
every day that
Right.
they're in the custody, Heartland is profiting.
I totally
like,
agree.
And now, just like the
Yeah,
Catholic Church wants
yeah.
to profit even more.
to-
And so we need to understand that these are the systems that we need to approach also, and we need to become more pressure on their backs. I mean, we've let them abuse us for years, and now we can't let this happen any longer. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'll come back to that. Yeah.
It's unfortunate that we're here today to have to talk about things like this, affecting little ones like this, our children, right? It's very unfortunate. It's disturbing. The information that you're giving us about this, the totality of it all, is very disturbing. And I'm looking at your sign, and it reads like a mathematical equation. So, and then at the end, it looks like the end result. It says for a more controlled, wider, desolate world. So the sister just asked a question, and I was hoping that maybe if you talked about the product, if you will, the purpose or the goal, it seems like that's what that is, the goal to all of this, for a more controlled, wider, and desolate world. Wider, obviously, for white people, and desolate for non-white people. So to her question, I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that part, and how far does the rabbit hole go, and what do people need to know, other than corporations and Heartland, because that's not the top, and Trump is not the top. So, like you said, that this has been going on even before Trump. So, can you speak to that part of what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think Emily mentioned that you want to talk about the separation on the lands.
You can continue.
Emily mentioned briefly, as she does. She always says things in these little nuggets, and then like weeks later, you go, "Oh, that's what she mentioned by she meant by that." How long has it been that white America has been, quote, rescuing non-white children? How long has it been that has been happening institutionally? And what was the political function of that history, right? Whether we're talking about Native kids in boarding schools, whether we're talking about slavery and African-American babies, right? This is a history of colonial occupation in its internal form. There are its external forms when you look at what the United States is doing, right, on other continents. And internally, and then the detention of migrant children is where the exterior meets the interior, right? It's where the global geopolitical power dynamic meets kind of places inside the territory of the United States, in our neighborhoods, down the street, 2 blocks from your house, right? This history whereby not sort of like, black lives, indigenous lives, non-white lives are to be made disposable and are to be made, sub-entities, non-lives, right? In order to be only valued as prisoners, as slaves, right? This is what's happening here. These children are part of, and this process of rescuing them is part of a much, much longer history. And I think a lot of community folks understand that. A lot of community folks immediately say, oh my God, this is just exactly like the history of racialized oppression, using children and using this language of white saviorism, right? People get that. Not so much in white communities, but in other communities, people get that. I think in a way we maybe thought that history was a little bit, more distant, or either in space or in time. Oh, this is happening somewhere else on the border. Or oh, this used to happen in the past, but not really like today. I think the reason why we want to talk about Heartland is because that's the local face of this. That is right here. We know where they are. We can go touch that building. We know who is the CEO. We know her name. We know how much she makes. We know who her political friends are in Chicago. We know when they do a fundraiser, to talk about what great saviors they are of these darling children. We know who are the people in suits who walk into that door, who take pictures with each other and congratulate each other for saving the children. These people are in our city. They are the local bodies of this larger colonial monster. And it can be on us to go after them. Little tiny groups like us, Emily with her babies, oftentimes with Lali sleeping on her shoulders, on her head like this, protesting these people, disrupting these people, shaming these people, and saying, we see you saviors, we know who the hell you are. And then the pigs come out. And then it's a whole damage control crisis for them. Big though their empire is, even Heartland's mini empire is huge. It's amazing how they shake in their boots when 10 people are outside their fundraiser. It's amazing how they shake in their boots when 50 people disrupt their holiday staff party. Unbelievable the amounts of security they need, right? This is important to see. We have so much power once we no longer believe their vision. They have a vision for a world they want to build. And once we stop believing in their world and saying, we don't want your world, we want to liberate ourselves from your vision of the world. It's extraordinary how frightened they are. Heartland now, the news, ProPublica, Google it. Heartland closes shelters because of protest. Came out 2 days ago. Because of public outrage and protest, public outrage is a couple of little grupitos. Us, the Brown Berets, a few little groups. We don't get salaries. We're not professional advocates,
We're not getting paid for this.
Handful of people went and stood outside the door and called them for what they are. Already, they're a multi-million-dollar business that's been going on for 25 years unchallenged. 25 years they've been able to say, we're rescuing kids, and nobody has publicly said, you're what? We don't believe you. Nobody has said that. Everybody's, Heartland's the good guys, right? Liberal America loves corporations like Heartland. 2 of their spaces, their facilities, are non-tenable for them. This is damage control. This isn't some big victory for us. This just shows us that we can hit them, and we can hit them hard. Oh, but what'll happen to the babies? Oh my God, they're closing their shelters. What'll happen to those babies, right? We have to force them to close down. We have to force them to close down all 100 of these horrible places around the country. That's how we're going to force the upper. How are we going to force the empire to crumble? We have to get to the local ones as we have a vision of an evolutionist future. We have to cut it down here locally too, right? And not in a way that's we're going to cut down the local ones because we want the nicer jailers. Oh, Heartland sexually abused a few kids. That's the only problem. When Heartland was being nice to the kids, that's okay. We want more of that. We don't want more nice incarceration, right? So I think that's one of the ways to sort of think about these big things are all tied up in the local things. And the big empire is all tied up with Heartland. We can hit at Heartland. And through that, start to see this larger world vision begin to crumble, I think.
And also see the other connections that we can also realize the other connections. Again, our money is power. We can see, we can feel that we're always just one person or just 2 people. But also if we start to disassociate with the companies that are working with Heartland, the companies that are working with ICE, the companies that are also essentially controlling our lives, because data collection is a really big process that will follow you for the rest of your life and your children's lives, and you will not be able to escape it. So these are big, big things that we're putting on your plate, but you can digest them slowly.
Can you tell them about Dwight, Illinois? What's going on?
Yes, so Dwight, Illinois, which is, it's down 55, which you can take the expressway or LSD to 55, and it's about an hour and a half. And so it's a teeny little town that used to be a women's prison town. So they're used to being jailers and incarcerating people, which it closed. And right now they have annexed, on Monday they voted to annex land to start constructing a detention center. They're not sure what type of people they will hold, but we know that they're undocumented people. We had conversations with people in the neighborhood, and one gentleman said he's probably a business owner, but he doesn't know what's really happening in Dwight. But he was saying that they have these new wind turbines that are supposed to bring more economic and and
Ecological friendly.
yes, ecologically friendly electricity to the community, but the majority of the people that are gaining from this, profiting, are outsiders that are getting money. But now Dwight, Illinois is being taxed with noise, with being not necessarily benefiting, and people were trying to explain that at the Dwight town hall meeting. There were people, many from outside of Dwight, and there were also the people that were, I'm sorry, it's slipping me the name of the company that wants... yes. And so they were there with their nice little suits, and you could immediately spot them in the crowd. And so Dwight, Illinois will be profiting $900 per day if they fill the beds 75%. And so it really doesn't matter, you know, what type of people are in there. They were trying to say, no, it's people that have committed crimes. You know, not actually. It's just, all you have to do is just become an undocumented person. Be an undocumented person. And, you know, this is a lust for money that you do not care about the outcome, the destruction of families. And many of the families are, if we care about this whole idea of citizenship, you know, many of the families are attached to citizens. And I promise you, this will destroy communities, and which will also bring down the profits of these companies.
But they advertise it. Okay, they advertise it as like a really nice one. Oh, this is gonna be the nicest detention center ever. There's gonna be like a gym, you know, and there's gonna be all kinds of recreational stuff. And isn't it better, you know, is the selling pitch? Isn't it better to detain people in a nice place that's specifically made to cater to their needs than the way they're detained now, which is by contracts with different state lockups, right? So they're at McKinney, they're at Tri-County, where they're in all these lockups. And this is a better alternative to those lockups. And this has been the selling point of every single project to build a new detention center in the Chicago metro region for the past 9 years. It started with Crete, and we fought Crete. And then it was Gary, and people fought Gary, right? On March 30th, there will be a forum on the histories of fighting immigrant detention centers and things that people have learned. And it's 4 different organizations from 4 different struggles in the last 8 years that have successfully defeated new immigrant detention centers. They'll be meeting for the first time in the same place and like presenting what they've learned from that history. And then talking moving forward, how we confront not just Dwight, but like the larger reality of immigration enforcement, which is also Amazon, right? Which is also Heartland, which is also all kinds of things. Border enforcement, which is also policing, right? Because it involves a lot of cooperation between ICE and policing. And it involves a lot of cooperation between the detention system and the prison system, right? So we want to think about abolishing the police and abolishing the prison system, and with detention as part of that. So that'll be a really interesting forum for people who are interested in that, because it'll be talking about all these different concrete struggles and what they're learning kind of globally from that, and how they can apply that to the new struggle in Dwight. But you can look at either Little Village Solidarity Network on our Facebook page for updates about Dwight. There's another kind of coalition called No ICE Dwight, and it's people who basically organize to go and attend these village council meetings to give testimony and try to impact the village to vote negatively. All we've seen so far is a lot of people go, they speak, and they speak really well, and the village council still votes because they're obviously, you know, bought and sold for it currently. So I think it'll be interesting to see moving forward how people can try different methods, right, of making it clear to the village council that it's not a good idea to vote for this, which of course it's economic development, it's jobs for Dwight, that's the arguments. They always give the same arguments, right? And the arguments that, well, if it won't be built in Dwight, it'll just be built somewhere else. And what we've seen is they've been trying to build a new detention center in the Chicago metro region for 8 years now. In every town, people have fought and stopped them.
Yes.
Every town. So it's not true that if they don't build it in Dwight, they will build it somewhere else. It's not true. It's true that we can, and every town can fight these facilities. And if every town fights these facilities, they won't have places to lock people up. But once they open these facilities, they will fill them. We know that for sure, right? It's always the case. The pressure to fill them is very real, and it's often built into the contracts. They're guaranteed
a certain percentage of occupancy, right? So it's not like this facility would be an alternative to the existing lockups. It's an additional lockup capacity that they want. It's an expansion of their lockup capacity that they want. And there's no reason to sort of let it happen, you know, or at least to let them do it without a serious fight, you know. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank
Stay
you.
in touch. Take our flyers. There are flyers on the back table. Please feel free to take our flyers and stay in touch. Are we cool? Oh yeah, you want to take our thing? Our banner? Oh.
The mic.
Come on, whatever.
Thank you to